It's 7 p.m. Wednesday, April 10th here in Seoul.
Coming up on NEWSCENTER tonight. President Moon Jae-in departs for Washington for summit talks with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump. Will the talks salvage stalled North Korea-U.S. nuclear negotiations? We have the analysis.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Washington's goal is a fully verifiably denuclearized peninsula and less risk in conventional means.
All eyes are on North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as he convenes a full meeting of the ruling Workers' Party's Central Committee. This comes a day after Kim called for a new strategic line amid the current tense situation.
And South Korea's National Assembly marks the centennial of the Provisional Assembly by holding a commemorative ceremony. NEWSCENTER begins now. Good evening and welcome to Arirang News Center live in Seoul. I'm Noara.
And I'm Han-Dan. Thanks for joining us. President Moon Jae-in is on his way to Washington for his much-anticipated summit with U.S. President Donald Trump.
Both leaders hope their talks at the White House can be the catalyst to get stalled diplomacy with North Korea back on track. Our senior political correspondent Shin Se-min starts us off.
Embarking on a whistle-stop trip to Washington for a North Korea-focused summit with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump, President Moon Jae-in's mission is to hammer home the importance of the top-down approach used so far in the denuclearization talks and the need for North Korea and the U.S. to start communicating again. The South Korean leader is en route to Washington for what will be his 7th face-to-face with President Trump.
This summit is based on the need for both sides to consult with each other and revive the momentum for dialogue after the Hanoi summit. In the U.S., President Moon will continue his top-down approach and look for concrete ways to achieve the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
This summit comes at a time when there seems to be consensus. Both Seoul and Washington can get nuclear diplomacy back on track, even though the most recent meeting between the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. ended with no concrete outcome in February. And South Korea's first couple will arrive in Washington on April 10th local time, upon which President Moon will meet with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, National Security Advisor John Bolton, and Vice President Mike Pence, respectively. All three, like President Trump, have been vocal about pushing for the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Then the summit between Presidents Moon and Trump will take place for about 2 hours at the White House. It'll be followed by an extended meeting with senior presidential aides. Though not fully disclosed, it's likely President Moon may raise the need to loosen sanctions on Pyongyang or provide incentives to North Korea that makes life easier for ordinary North Koreans. The leaders may also cover their military cost-sharing framework, bilateral trade issues, and even a reciprocal visit to Seoul by President Trump in the first half of the year. Bringing the leaders, Kim and Trump, back to the negotiating table might not be too hard, since they've met before and neither has shot down the idea. But the big unknown is whether or not President Moon's trip this week will help find a middle ground between Trump's all-or-nothing strategy and Kim's small-deal approach. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Since the collapse of the North Korea-U.S. summit in Hanoi, there have been concerns on Seoul and Washington's seemingly discrepant approaches to resolve North Korea's nuclear issue. Will the Moon-Trump summit be able to quell the controversy? Our Kim Mo-gyun heard from experts.
After the Hanoi summit last February ended without fruitful results, there have been concerns that the ironclad alliance between Seoul and Washington is shaking over differences in their approaches. South Korea has been reportedly asking the U.S. to partially ease sanctions on inter-Korean projects, including the Kaesong Industrial Complex and the tourism project at Mount Kumgang, to use them as leverage in the denuclearization process. The U.S., meanwhile, has been against the idea, as it believes that easing sanctions on the regime would lower the effectiveness of the sanctions strategy. Some have claimed that their contrasting approaches could tear the alliance apart. However, an expert says that such differences in perspectives are a natural thing given the complexity of the denuclearization and peace talks. He also said inter-Korean projects, including the reduction of military exercises and the establishment of the liaison office, were made under close cooperation with the U.S.
The Moon administration has been cautiously approaching the issue of inter-Korean economic cooperation under the condition that it doesn't go against international sanctions, and also has been pre-discussing every sanctions-related issue through working group talks with Washington.
With that being said, President Moon's role during Friday's summit seems even more important.
Though the talks could end without any concrete outcome, I think the two sides confirming each other's perspectives itself is symbolic. Because if their ties start to fall out of shape, third-party nations could have more influence over the North's denuclearization.
However, the deputy chief of Seoul's National Security Office, Kim Hyun-jong, said last week that inter-Korean economic projects are currently not on the agenda for the two leaders' sit-down. Many experts are suggesting that such projects could be used as a corresponding measure for the North's denuclearization steps, but for now, the two leaders will likely focus on bringing the North back to the negotiating table. Kim Mo-gyan, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has renewed his stance on North Korea, saying Washington's goal on North Korea is the regime's final and fully verified denuclearization. Lee Ji-won has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo reiterated that Washington's goal on North Korea is the regime's final, fully verified denuclearization, but with a slight addition of less risk in conventional measures. Pompeo explained before a U.S. Senate Appropriations Subcommittee hearing on Tuesday that the U.S. objective also includes a brighter future for the North Korean people. This is the first time Pompeo has mentioned the risks associated with North Korea's conventional weapons. While the issue of denuclearization has been discussed by Pyongyang and Washington, alleviating military tensions caused by conventional weapons has been discussed by the two Koreas alone, and Pompeo's latest comments have raised speculation on whether the U.S. stance has gotten tougher on the North. Pompeo also answered yes when asked if the strong sanctions will remain in place during the denuclearization talks with the North. He said the U.S. also forced a global coalition at the United Nations to enforce the toughest ever sanctions on North Korea. And to a question on whether he thinks North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is a tyrant, Pompeo answered sure, and that he has said that in the past too. This is also uncommon, as the U.S. has been careful not to make sensitive and aggressive comments towards the regime since the start of their dialogue. The comments come amid a standstill between the North and the U.S. as Pyongyang seeks partial alleviation of sanctions for step-by-step denuclearization measures, while the U.S. seeks concrete denuclearization steps and an overall roadmap from the North in exchange for sanctions relief. And with the South Korea-U.S. summit to take place later this week, where the leaders are expected to look for a middle ground to get Pyongyang and Washington back on track for dialogue, observers are keeping a close eye on whether Pompeo's firm stance is just rhetoric or an actual change in the U.S. stance. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
North Korea's ruling Workers' Party is holding a series of meetings to decide on its new policy direction, which is highly likely to be ratified through a parliamentary gathering coming up later this week. While leader Kim Jong-un is yet to make any official announcement following the no-deal Hanoi summit, much attention is focused on what kind of message will come out of those meetings of high political significance. Woo Jung-hee for us tonight.
North Korea is holding major party meetings this week to determine its future policy direction. Pyongyang state-run media report that Kim Jong-un presided Tuesday over a meeting of the Politburo. That was to be followed Wednesday by a plenary meeting of the party's Central Committee. At Tuesday's meeting, Kim Jong-un stressed the need to follow through on the party's, quote, new strategic line. The new strategic line here refers to the North's decision last year to abandon nuclear development and focus on its economy. Describing the current situation as a, quote, tense one, Kim Jong-un urged the officials to uphold the spirit of, quote, self-reliance, a reference to the sanctions on the regime and how to survive them.
We think North Korea will stick with its strategy of concentrating on its economy. And today's plenary meeting will determine new directions and measures, which we will continue to watch.
At the plenary meeting on Wednesday, the North's ruling party is expected to announce its future policies on the economy and possibly denuclearization. And these decisions will be ratified by the North's parliament, the Supreme People's Assembly, on Thursday. Considering Kim Jong-un's recent focus on the economy, observers say it's unlikely that the North will veer back into developing nuclear weapons. But for now, it doesn't seem like Pyongyang will agree to Washington's idea of a denuclearization all in one go either. What the regime has said rather indicates that it'll try and struggle through the sanctions without any help. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Shifting gears now, a commemoration ceremony was held today to mark 100 years since the establishment of Korea's Provisional Assembly in Shanghai. The body, which served as the basis of the National Assembly, enacted the Provisional Constitution and changed the name of this country to the Republic of Korea. Kim Min-ji has more.
South Korea's National Assembly held a ceremony on Wednesday to mark 100 years since the establishment of the Provisional Assembly, back when Imperial Japan ruled the peninsula. The body opened in Shanghai on April 10, 1919, with its inaugural meeting kicking off at 10 p.m. that night. National Assembly Speaker Moon Hee-sang said it's time to look back at the past 100 years and see if the National Assembly is living up to the Republican and parliamentary values instilled at the time of the legislature in exile.
In our dark history, there was division, strife, conflict, and confusion. I believe the responsibility lies in the hands of the political arena and leaders from all walks of life. For the politicians of today, it should be an important moment to reflect and think about how to proceed in the next 100 years.
The Assembly in exile enacted the Provisional Constitution, which outlined the people's rights and duties. The members of the Assembly also decided to change the name of the country from Taean Empire to Taean Mingguk, or the Republic of Korea, to show that it was the people's country. Over the next 100 years, Speaker Moon said the country needs a paradigm shift, starting with a reform of the Constitution.
If we do not revamp the power structure to change the country's imperialistic presidential system, and do not fix the electoral system that distorts voter sentiment, political strife will deepen at every election, and the consequences will be dire.
To commemorate the occasion, the official seal of the Provisional Assembly was donated, as well as a number of keepsakes and documents that Hong Jin, the last Speaker of the Provisional Assembly, had preserved.
A similar event will be held in Shanghai at 10 p.m. tonight. South Korea's political leaders will be reenacting the first session at the same time and on the same date it took place 100 years ago. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Tomorrow, meanwhile, marks the 100-year anniversary of the establishment of Korea's provisional government, and a special exhibition currently going on in Seoul is showing visitors the lives of those independence activists 100 years ago. Our Won Jung-hwan reports.
Independence when that day comes. A praise that was said a lot a century ago by Koreans at the provisional government in Shanghai, longing for the freedom of their homeland. A special exhibition commemorating the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea is currently being held at the National Museum of Korean Contemporary History in central Seoul. The pictures and copies of newspapers made 100 years ago reveal the process of establishing and integrating the Provisional Government in Shanghai, which was created in the sincere hope for Korea's independence. The items provide an insight into the harried lives of the Koreans outside of the country following the March 1st movement in 1919, and shows the efforts of the independence activists to join together and launch a base they could operate from.
Looking around here today, the exhibit makes it very clear that the challenge and the struggle to build a government was real, from the exhibits you can also tell that it meant obviously a great deal.
And you can go through the museum here and you see the videos and the photos represented over there. And when you read the history about this, you can feel the pain of people that time, how they suffered a lot in that war period time and what they did for the independence.
Life in Shanghai posed constant challenges for the Koreans. But despite the adversities, Koreans established schools, sought work to support their livelihoods, and participated in the independence movement. And their efforts back then still resonate with young Koreans today.
After looking around, I would have fought for independence for sure, since it's my own country.
The exhibit, which runs until September 15th, raises awareness of the unknown heroes of Korea's independence struggle who helped lay the groundwork for the Korea of today. Won Jong-won, Arirang News.
Now, let's get the latest from the wildfires last week in Gangwon-do province. The government says that they burned down 3 times the area it had announced a few days ago. At a press briefing today, the head of the Korea Forest Service said satellite pictures and expert analysis now show the fires burned around 17 million square meters of land. That's about 6 times the size of Seoul's financial district of Yeouido. The agency explained that it couldn't come up with an accurate figure before because it had been occupied with putting out the fires. Over the next week and a half, government officials are planning to do an on-site survey to confirm the figure. Meanwhile, President Moon Jae-in has made a personal donation to help the victims of last week's devastating wildfire. The Blue House said Wednesday that the President and the First Lady donated the funds through a disaster relief association to help displaced residents rebuild their lives. Other presidential aides were also said to have sent around $42,000. Last week's blaze had killed 1 person and forced some 4,000 people to flee their homes. Turning to the local economy now, Seoul's finance minister says the government's planned extra budget bill will not exceed 7 trillion won, or about $6.1 billion. Hong Nam-gi told reporters today that on top of addressing fine dust pollution and creating more jobs, part of the extra budget could be used to strengthen wildfire response measures. The government is expected to submit the bill to the National Assembly later this month. Finally, a glint of hope for job seekers here in South Korea. Last month, the jobless rate was down slightly, bringing the employment rate to 60%, a new record for the month of March. Kim Da-mi has the details.
The upswing in South Korea's job market continued in March as 250,000 more people were newly employed compared to the previous year, surpassing the 200,000 mark for the second straight month. The jobless rate also edged down 0.2% on-year to 4.3%. This means almost 27 million people were working in South Korea as of last month. The uptick in the employment rate was also seen across all age groups except for those in their 40s. Statistics Korea, which collected the data, credited the overall increase to a higher number of people employed in their 60s, as well as to more jobs created in the country's health and social services sectors. South Korea's new 52-hour workweek regulations also played a role in the jump.
Most of the jobs created are not entirely new. Because of 52-hour work week, part-time jobs of less than 17 hours a week have emerged as replacements.
However, the number of jobs in the manufacturing sector, for which South Korea is heavily reliant, fell by almost 110,000, the 12th straight month of losses. Experts pointed to sluggish growth in the manufacturing and retail sectors as the main reason for the job losses. In order to boost job growth in all sectors, the government is planning to create some 158,000 new jobs in various sectors, including artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and innovative industries by the year 2022. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
The International Monetary Fund has slashed its global economic outlook for this year to the lowest level since 2016. South Korea's growth forecast, however, remains unchanged. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
The IMF has downgraded its world economic outlook for 2019, warning of a global economic slowdown. It forecasts the world economy will grow 3.3% this year, down from the 3.5% it had forecast for 2019 in January. This is the lowest level of forecast in 3 years. Describing the present as a delicate moment, the IMF's chief economist explained that the global economy will recover during the latter half of the year and reach 3.6% growth in 2020. The IMF pointed to trade tensions, Brexit, and other political uncertainties as some of the risks facing the world economy. The IMF has maintained its 2019 growth forecast for South Korea unchanged at 2.6%. Its World Economic Outlook released on Tuesday also forecasts the country's economy to improve in 2020 with 2.8% growth. The South Korean government stimulus package, including a supplementary budget, is seen as the major reason behind the fund maintaining the country's economic outlook amid a lowered global economic forecast. The IMF also pointed out that South Korea should adopt expansionary monetary policies or credit easing policy in case the economy faces challenges. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
Japanese authorities have confirmed that the wreckage found in the Pacific Ocean Tuesday is the F-35 fighter jet that went missing on the same day. It is the second F-35 to crash in the 2 decades it has been flying. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Kim Ji-yeon tells us more.
Japan's Air Self-Defense Force confirmed Wednesday the wreckage and debris found in the Pacific Ocean belongs to a missing Japanese F-35 stealth fighter jet, one of the world's most advanced warplanes. Search teams recovered parts of the jet, which is presumed to have crashed some 30 minutes after it took off during a training mission Tuesday evening. The pilot of the aircraft is still missing. Japanese defense officials said the single-engine jet was on a training flight with other F-35s when contact was lost. The jets based at Misawa Air Base were about 135 kilometers off the east coast of Aomori Prefecture when the jet in question's pilot signaled a need to abort the mission shortly before radar contact was lost. Japan's Air Self-Defense Force said it decided to hold off all operations and local production of the F-35s and instead have them directly sent from the U.S. The Japanese government had planned to acquire a total of 105 F-35 stealth fighter jets, but local media outlets in Japan say that following this incident, that plan could be changed. The crash aircraft was manufactured by U.S.-based Lockheed Martin and was the first assembled by Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. F-35s have been deployed to Japan since January last year, excluding the missing aircraft. A total of 12 remain. Meanwhile, Korea's Air Force said it plans to stay on course to acquire a total of 40 F-35s by 2021, having already received 2 last month. It said the United States Pacific Command has not sent out a suspension recommendation. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The number of people who used ambulances due to respiratory illnesses increased in the first quarter of this year, a consequence of the high levels of fine dust. According to the National Fire Agency, 21,849 people used ambulances due to respiratory illnesses from January to March 2019, the highest figure for the first quarter in the last 5 years. And in March, when the emergency fine dust measures were in place, there was a 29% increase in call-outs compared to March the previous year. The director of the National Fire Agency said people should refrain from going outside when fine dust levels are bad or worse.
The Korean government says it will support marketing efforts for businesses in struggling sectors such as shipbuilding. At an export strategy meeting today, the Trade Ministry said it will use AI and big data to provide local exporters with information on foreign buyers. It will also strengthen overseas marketing by boosting awareness of Korean firms at global exhibitions such as CES. The ministry also vowed to increase the number of trade agencies for small and mid-sized exporters. Phones made by Samsung and LG will be the first 5G devices to hit the US market next month, giving them a potentially lucrative head start on Apple. Samsung's Galaxy S10 5G is set to debut with Verizon on May 16th. LG is known to have partnered with Sprint to launch the V50 ThinQ, which will be released here in Korea late next week. Apple is yet to announce plans for 5G phones, but analysts predict they may come in the next year or two. In football, South Korean forward Son Heung-min has scored again for Tottenham Hotspur, this time in their first-leg Champions League quarter-final match against Manchester City. He broke the deadlock in the 78th minute to give his side a 1-0 advantage going into next Wednesday's second leg in Manchester. The 27-year-old has now become Asia's second top scorer in the competition with 10 goals. South Korea's cultural heritage sites have attracted more than 2 million visitors in the first quarter of this year, almost a 30% increase from the year before, and a first quarter record. Popular attractions include the nation's ancient palaces, the Cheongmyo Shrine, and the royal tombs of the Joseon dynasty. The Cultural Heritage Foundation said the rise was mainly thanks to expanded nighttime tours at Changgyeonggung Palace and allowing public access to previously restricted areas. That's your 3-minute news flash. News in depth coming up next.
President Moon Jae-in departed for Washington on Wednesday for summit talks with U.S. President Trump. The talks will be the 7th of its kind and the 3rd to be held in the U.S. Capitol. Today, we go in-depth on whether this Moon-Trump summit will salvage talks between North Korea and the U.S. that have halted since the no-deal Hanoi summit back in February. For that, we're joined by Dr. James Kim of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's always good to have you with us.
Nice to be back down.
President Moon Jae-in is scheduled to meet with U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo, National Security Advisor Bolton, and Vice President Pence in respective order prior to his meeting with President Trump. Now, these three officials are known for their hardline North Korea policy. What could be a motive behind these arrangements of the meetings?
So Secretary Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton, as well as Vice President Pence, are central figures when it comes to policy decisions related to North Korea. So if the president's goal here is to try to convince the United States to maybe shift his policy a bit on these issues, then it makes sense why he would be holding meetings with these individuals in addition to President Trump.
Now, before holding an extended summit, President Moon and Trump will hold talks along with First Ladies Kim Jong-suk and Melania Trump. Now, as far as I know, it's quite unconventional for the First Ladies to attend the summit meeting as well. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it could be, it's very unconventional, but it could actually soften the seriousness of the meeting. I think the overall approach to the talks has been relatively informal. As far as I know, the agenda hasn't been announced yet, and I'm not even sure it's ever going to be announced. It seems like this is a way to maybe soften the mood on the serious topic of concern for both leaders, and to have the First Ladies there to facilitate that, I think, is one way to make that happen.
And First Ladies Kim Jong-suk and Melania Trump will hold a separate luncheon on Thursday, Washington time. And this will mark the first time in 30 years for a South Korean First Lady to hold a one-on-one luncheon with a U.S. First Lady. Implications to this rare event?
So I think, better the rapport between the two First Ladies. I think the more personal and closer the relationship between President Trump and President Moon. So it's a good idea to develop that relationship. But I question whether there's going to be any lasting impact on policy side. Still, I don't think it hurts to have this kind of an event on the side.
Now to some more serious questions. Now the big question is how much the Moon-Trump summit will be able to narrow the gap between North Korea and the U.S. Well, the Blue House has stated that a continual early harvest is needed to move denuclearization forward. What kind of strategy do you expect from President Moon this time around?
I think we've already had a blitzkrieg of high-ranking officials about 2 weeks ago, all visiting and coordinating with their counterparts in Washington regarding this meeting. So a lot of the sort of the preparatory work has already been underway, and the announcements that have come out leading up to this meeting tomorrow is that South Korea is in agreement with the United States on a comprehensive agreement on denuclearization with a phased implementation. And this is where I think this idea of early harvest comes in. On the implementation side, I think President Moon is going to push very hard that there needs to be some substantive results here on the sanctions side for North Korea in order to continue the momentum towards complete denuclearization if North Korea is only willing to offer Yongbyon. So, and I'm not so sure that the U.S. is going to be in complete disagreement with this idea. Obviously, there's got to be some coordination and discussion on exactly what kinds of concessions we're talking about. But it'll be interesting whether, President Moon can convince President Trump to come around to seeing this the way that he sees it. And it's difficult because the U.S. has maintained a fairly consistent policy over the past year and a half or so on this issue, and they have not really changed their position. So it'll be interesting, what President Moon says to President Trump to get President Trump to come around to seeing this his way.
So President Moon will likely attempt to induce some concessions from Mr. Trump on, particularly on sanctions.
Well, I mean, it's a try that he might engage in. Or if he thinks that this isn't going to be successful, then it'll be just a nice photo op where he is then able to address this other issue about the gap in coordination between South Korea and the United States, which is, again, a big thorn on his side. And it's not just the North Korean issue that could potentially be a problem here. There are other outstanding alliance issues related to the burden sharing agreement, which, the negotiation has to restart again because that's a one-year agreement, right, along with a potential here for an auto tariff to be levied by President Trump based on Section 232 announcement and the report that the Commerce Department has already made.
You've briefly brushed upon some other issues that may be discussed on the table, but going back to the North Korea issue, how far do you think Trump will be willing to make concessions to make some progress this time?
There's, again, what I've said is, you take a look at what the president has said and done, and I look more at the action over the past year and a half, and the U.S. has not changed its position on this, that sanctions relief will only be possible after complete denuclearization. So it's not clear to me what it will take for President Trump to change that stance. But again, I think President Moon has stated his intention to try to do the best he can on this front, and he's keep banging away at this idea of an early harvest, which seems to suggest that he wants some kind of concession from the United States here.
So still tough road ahead. Now, another key issue garnering much attention is whether President Moon will be able to quell the controversy surrounding Seoul and Washington's discrepant approach to North Korea's denuclearization. Your thoughts?
Yeah, again, as I've said, this is an issue that is going to be a thorn in his side if this meeting does not go well. At the very least, what he can do is have a nice photo op with President Trump, and a good feeling kind of a meeting where people will, not question this gap between the U.S. and South Korea on coordinating its policies on North Korea. But President Trump has in the past gone off script on issues like the FTA during the first summit, for instance, when he mentioned that without President Moon being, prepared to answer any questions on that during a press conference. So if there's always that danger with President Trump, right, going off script, and if that does happen, if President Moon is unable to handle that kind of situation smoothly, it might not work to his advantage in quelling these kinds of issues and criticisms about the lack of coordination between the U.S. and South Korea.
So there's that Trump risk, if you will. Now, if South Korea and the U.S. succeed in finding the middle ground in resolving the nuclear stalemate, do you think this will likely lead to the third round of Pyongyang-Washington talks, as well as perhaps Kim Jong-un's visit to Seoul?
Maybe. I mean, there's always that possibility, but it's not clear to me at the moment why North Korea would come out of its shell and re-engage again. And that's largely because of some of the signals we're getting. The North Korean state media, Uri Minjokgiri, for instance, recently responded to the South Korean Unification Ministry's statement to this effect, that, after the summit, that, there could be a potential here for another summit, after the U.S. ROK summit, another potential for a inter-Korean summit, and to move ahead on inter-Korean cooperation. And the Uri Minjokgiri came out, and I believe the direct quote was, the statement is nothing but an empty shell, quote unquote. Just empty talk without any feasibility. So the initial reaction coming out of North Korea isn't really positive and encouraging. So, but who knows? After the meeting with President Trump, we might have a breakthrough, and North Korea's thinking on this issue might change.
Now, Kim Jong-un presided the meeting of the ruling Workers' Party's Central Committee's Politburo on Tuesday, calling for a new strategic line to cope with the current tense situation. Also today, he convened an extended meeting, a full meeting of the Workers' Party's Central Committee. Now, judging from these recent moves, can you read what is on Kim's card? It's not clear. There are several other events that are lined up for this week, including the event next week on April 15th, and then the one-year anniversary of the summit towards the end of the month. So there are a lot of important markers that we need to be watching for and to be listening to Kim Jong-un's words very carefully. I will be looking for two things here. First, does he take his eyes off of the nuclear issue? Does he change his position on this denuclearization? And does he focus more on the economic aspects of this? There could be a potential there that he might be hunkering down for a long haul sort of, a march or arduous march living with this very oppressive sanctions regime. If his, argument is, we're going to try to fight this out and try to outlast our opponent who's trying to oppress us with sanctions. There could be a second announcement here, which is potential for a personnel shift. Could there be a change in the team that was leading this effort from the North Korean side? Would Kim Yong-chol and Kim Hyok-chol no longer be the central figures negotiating with the United States? Will there even be a new team that's going to be announced that will handle this issue from this day on forward? So there's some potential here for some personnel shifts, as well as some policy orientation and posturing on the part of North Korea that we will be looking and watching for very carefully. Now, very briefly, before I let you go, during Tuesday's meeting, North Korea unusually refrained from lashing out harsh rhetoric towards the U.S. while also not mentioning a word about nuclear weapons. How do you interpret that? Yeah, so this is what I was referring to initially, that if the focus is largely on the economy, and his argument here is that we're in this for the long haul, then clearly he wants to try to wait this out and trying to outlast the United States and live with the pressure. But if the focus is back on the sort of the nuclear issue and the strategic shift that he's talking about, and no longer on the Byungjin issue, there's also a potential here that North Korea is still open to the possibility of talks and negotiations with the U.S. as well. So there are two possibilities here, and it's not clear at the moment which one Kim Jong-un has chosen, but clearly he wants to leave the dialogue channel open for now. All right, let's keep a close eye on how things unfold from this point. Thank you, Dr. Kim, for your insights today. Thanks for having me.
It's now time to take a look at some of the digital media content available on Arirang's website and other social media platforms.
And today we have another episode of Koreator with Sammy and Steffi from the U.S. telling us how and why they fell in love with K-pop.
Yes, and don't forget you, our viewers, can also become a Koreator. Just upload a video sharing your story about Korea to the email address shown at the end of this clip.
Hi guys, it's Sammy. Hey, it's Stephanie. We're Sammy. Steffi! You don't look Sammy. Now wait! I used to be really into indie music and I don't listen to pop music. Then I was getting super into pop music and boy bands. I kind of saw this other guy named Seven who had a song with Lil Kim. Oh, I remember that. I remember that. And then I came across Lollipop. That's literally your favorite. I was completely sold. Mine is more random than yours. I landed upon a K-pop video because I was obsessed with JB's, aka Justin Bieber at the time. He had just come out with "I'ma Love You One," you know, one time. Yeah, for sure. And I was trying to click on another Justin Bieber video, but I happened to click upon a 2 p.m. again and again. I was like, this is not what I was looking for. But then I was mesmerized. You don't know the language, you don't know what's going on, but it literally just pulls you in. I felt like I had discovered something, like Christopher Columbus. How have I not known about this my whole life? Everyone needs to be open-minded. I think music is one thing where it transcends race, gender, all of those things, because everyone can listen and enjoy it. I think K-pop is for everyone. Look, isn't that so cute? What are you Bogies? Mine's upset. This looks delicious. It is delicious. Who doesn't like beef? I got you. You know that you got it. Yeah. Okay, all you have to do is sing loud at karaoke to get a good score. You don't actually need to know the language. Let us know if you've ever been to a Korean karaoke place, and if you liked it, and comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks guys. Like, share, all that good stuff. Bye.
After receiving some much-needed rain, the air has freshened up, and most importantly, the intense dry conditions have subsided.
Yes, but the weather has also gotten much chillier. So let's get more details from our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle, what is the latest?
Now, most of the rain cleared up, but the mountainous regions of Gangwon-do province where it received heavy snow, near 20 centimeters, can expect 1 to 3 centimeters of more snow tonight. Now, we'll most likely look up to clear skies tomorrow, but as a weak front pushes through, clouds will linger into the afternoon. And Beijing can also expect some warm conditions. However, the nation will remain under seasonal average readings as the cold northwesterly winds continues to blow. Now, you'll be heading out to chilly morning as the mercury stays 1 to 4 degrees lower than the seasonal norms. Now, Seoul will wake up to 5 degrees Celsius, while Jeju makes it into double-digit readings. Into the day, Seoul will have a 10-degree jump to reach 15 degrees. In fact, the whole country will range between 13 and 16 degrees. And we're tracking another heavy rainstorm on Sunday and also on Monday, but we'll also see some nice breaks before and afterwards. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
And that wraps up this edition of Arirang News. Thank you as always for watching.
We'll be back same time tomorrow with more global and domestic news. So until then, goodbye.